نحن أقسمنا يمينا أن نضحي أو نرى الإسلام شرعا ونظاما.
Adventure. Asiya sat at the appointed time she had set for her friend Beda, anxiously and eagerly awaiting her arrival. She was surprised that her friend had requested a date and insisted on being alone together, and therefore she expected to find something unpleasant with her friend. Her wait was not long, as Beda arrived a few minutes late. Asiya sat waiting for Beda to begin speaking about the news she had. She seemed calm, trying to hide some signs of worry and confusion. The silence continued for a while, then she said, "May I ask you a question, Asiya?" Asiya replied, "Yes, I welcome that." Beda said, "And will the answer be honest?" She said, "As always with you, Beda." She said, "Why did you refuse Fuad's hand, Asiya?" Asiya paused for a moment, as if surprised by a question she hadn't expected from before, then said, "And now, may I ask?" Beda said, "Yes, of course." She said, "What prompts you to ask this question, Beda? Don't you think the answer might embarrass me?" Beda lowered her head for a moment, then raised it, saying, "Because it matters to me, Asiya." Asiya said, "And what matters to you about it?" "A relative proposed to me, but I refused him for personal reasons." Beda hesitated, then said, "Because he proposed to me, Asiya, and I want to know why you refused him." Asiya said, "Ah, I see." Then she fell silent. Then Beda added, pleadingly, "That's why you see me compelled to ask. Am I not your friend, Asiya? Or doesn't my matter concern you, my sister?" Asiya said, "Yes, and because you are my friend and because your matter concerns me, I will tell you the reason for my rejection of him." "But what do you know about him so far?" She said, "I know that he is a cultured, handsome, well-mannered, and highly regarded young man with a distinguished social standing." Asiya said, "Yes, he is as you mention, Beda, and I would add that his financial situation is good. But is what you have mentioned all there is to it?" Beda's face turned pale, and she muttered, "But he is not religiously observant." "So, even knowing this, you still don't know the reason for my rejection of him?" She said, "I admit that religion is more important than all these qualities, but that is something that can be fixed, I believe." Asiya said, "And how?" She said, "Didn't it occur to you that you could make him a good person, Asiya?" Asiya replied calmly, "And you, did that occur to you, Beda?" She said, "Frankly, I consider refusal a form of cowardice or running away." Asiya said, "Since you are speaking frankly, I hope you will explain your opinion on the matter." She said, "I find in bringing Fuad and those like him to religion a religious gain that should be worked for." Asiya smiled and said, "Of course, that is a given, but by what means and at what cost?" Beda said, "This path has opened up for us naturally, so why don't we take advantage of it, Asiya? And frankly, why should I reject Fuad with all his good qualities and leave him for a wife who will lead him further and further away from religion, instead of accepting him and trying to draw him towards faith?" Asiya said, "That's a point of view I don't want to impose on you, as I can't force anything on you, Beda. But it's a dangerous gamble, and there's nothing more difficult than risking one's faith or married life." Beda said, "Please, Asiya, don't try to exaggerate the matter to this extent. Marriage in general is nothing more than an adventure, and I feel capable of undertaking this experience." Asiya said, "But you were mistaken in this claim, Beda. There is a vast difference between an adventure with a devout young man whose conduct and behavior are protected by the teachings of Islam, and an adventure with a young man who is protected from it only by custom and law, both of which are subject to change and development." Beda said, "But it is an adventure that, if successful, would be in the interest of the religion." Asiya said, "You say, if it succeeds, and this, if, is proof of your lack of confidence in its success. Marriage is a sacred structure that cannot stand on shaky foundations." Beda lowered her head as if fighting the conflict raging within her, then raised it, saying, "So, what is your opinion, miss?" Asiya said, "The truth is, I fear for you the consequences of this adventure, and I cannot give you more advice than this. But it is a dangerous game, Beda." No matter what, a husband cannot submit to his wife's idea as long as he does not automatically believe in it. Rather, he will try to subject her to his idea and drag her towards believing in his point of view. At that point, the wife stands at a crossroads, either the destruction of the marital home or the destruction of her faith, which is the harsher and more terrible of the two, as you know. Asiya said this and then fell silent, waiting for the effect of her words on Bida. Bida was silent for a moment, then said in a hoarse voice. So, Asiya said, so I find you better off not putting yourself in an unenviable position. Bida said, let's suppose I'm forced to do it, what am I supposed to do? Asiya said, you alone must decide your fate, Bida, and you have no right to subject your will to anyone, whoever they may be. Bida lowered her head as if thinking, and her gaze lingered as she crumbled a small white paper between her fingers. Then she raised her head, saying almost defiantly, but I will take the risk, Asiya, and I hope success will be my ally. Asiya could only give her a long, expressive look, then said somewhat coldly, you and what you choose for yourself, Bida, and I hope you won't regret this decision later. At this, Bida gathered the edges of her cloak and stood up, saying, I hope I haven't upset you, Asiya. Asiya said, I haven't upset you, but I'm only hurt. Then Bida extended her hand to Asiya in greeting, and Asiya escorted her to the door and returned feeling as though she had lost her friend forever. Bida sat waiting for Fuad's return. The clock was approaching 11 o'clock at night, and she felt anxious for him, as he had never been late since their wedding 3 weeks prior. She watched the clock until it was nearing 11:30, at which point she heard the door open and close gently. She rose from her place and looked towards the door to find Fuad entering, and her face lit up with joy. She said, you were late, Fuad. She was alarmed to see a hint of annoyance on his face, which he quickly tried to hide as he replied. And why haven't you slept yet, Bida? She said, how can I sleep while you're still out of the house, Fuad? He said, taking off his clothes and changing into his house clothes. But that will cost you dearly, Bida. She said. And how? He said. Because I won't be able to get home early most nights, and that's why I don't see any reason for you to stay up alone. Bida fell silent, stunned by what she heard. She tried to deny what she had heard or understood, and waited until he sat down. Then she said, dinner is ready, Fuad. He smiled, a little shyly, and said, I had dinner out, Bida. She said, oh, and how? He said, I was invited to some friend's house at the club, and I couldn't refuse because the invitation was in my honor. She said, bon appétit, but why didn't you tell me before? He said, I didn't see any reason to tell you, and I knew you wouldn't go with me there. She said, but at least so I won't worry about you. He said, but you must know that I am a social person who lives among educated, liberal people, and I cannot be secluded in my house with a woman. He said this with a touch of sharpness in his tone, then added, and now, please, have your supper, Bida. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him with longing, then said, I don't feel like eating. He said, then let's go to sleep. She gathered the remnants of her strength and said in a gentle tone, it seems you have performed your prayers, so you want to sleep. He said somewhat coldly, the night is half over, and thus the time for prayer has passed. She said, no, perhaps it is not half over yet, and besides, its obligatory time is still there. Present. He said, as if you don't know how burdened and tired I am, Bida. She said, but tiredness is not a legitimate excuse for not praying, Fuad. He laughed sarcastically and then said, my lord accepts this excuse from me. She said, but this is considered negligence on your part in prayer. Didn't you hold fast to it as long as you love me, Fuad? At this point, signs of anger appeared on him, and he stood up, saying, please don't link your love with prayer and fasting, Bida. Let me love you as I want, not as you want. Besides, I won't allow you to hold me accountable every night for praying. He said this, then went to the bed and went to sleep. As for Bida, she stood frozen in place for a while, overwhelmed by the shock, and felt that Asiya's words were beginning to materialize before her as a tangible reality. So she turned to the Quran, hoping to find some peace and reassurance in reciting it. She opened it from wherever she could, and the first verse on the page was, "And Allah did not wrong them, but they wronged themselves." The days and weeks continued to pass, one after another, and Beta could scarcely find a way to win Fouad over. Whenever she spoke to him about religion, he met her with mockery at times and aversion at others. No matter how much comfort and happiness she provided him at home, she found him longing for the outside world more and more. One night, exhausted from sleeplessness and waiting, he returned to her. She found him cheerful and open-hearted, and she thought the opportunity was ripe to speak to him about what she wanted. So, in a tone she tried to make calm and gentle, she said, "Do you know how much I am suffering, Fouad?" Fouad showed some surprise and said, "You are suffering? Why, haven't I provided you with every comfort?" She said, "Yes, I admit that you have provided me with every comfort, but what matters is happiness, Fouad. There is no comfort without happiness." He said, "And how is that? Or aren't you happy, Beta?" She said, "How can I be happy when I find you so far from me, Fouad?" "Yes, far from me. In your thoughts, your heart, and your body." He said, "My thoughts are far from yours, and I admit it. My body is also mentally distant from you. This is only natural. But my heart loves you, Beta, and that's why I object to this part of what you said, my dear." She said, "But love requires pleasing the beloved, and you know I'm uncomfortable with your situation, Fouad." He said in surprise, "Uncomfortable with my situation? Have I wronged you in any way?" She said, "No, you haven't wronged me directly, but you're wronging the idea I believe in, the idea you promised to respect at the beginning. To put it more plainly, you're not practicing religion in the way that draws you to me, Fouad." He said, "I cannot change my situation, Beta. Is it reasonable to cut off my lifelong friends? Or is it reasonable to withdraw from social life and isolate myself behind these walls? Is it reasonable to pray Dhuhr in the mosque and Maghrib in the congregational mosque because my wife wants me to? Worship should stem from personal faith, not from worshipping my Lord because you want me to. That is nothing but hypocrisy and deceit. I am an upright man, sincere in my work, trustworthy with the rights of others, and faithful in my relationships with my friends. What more could you want, my dear?" Beta listened, her heart sinking, and replied, almost pleadingly, "And me, where do I fit into all this?" He said, You are my beloved wife, whom I would never put anyone before. Come to me, Beta, and you will know the happiness I will give you." She said, "What do you mean by, come?" He said, "I mean, let go of this complicated idea that's blinding you to the light of life, and come to me with your whole being, your soul, your heart, and your mind, so that I may show you the meaning of life, which you still don't understand. And sadly, you are now at a crossroads, Beta. Either you give me your hand so I can take you with me to a world of happiness and bliss, or you remain a prisoner in your home, content with what you have." She said, "And there isn't a third option, Fouad?" He paused for a moment, then said, "Yes, which is for us to separate. Though that is difficult for me, it is, given your rejection of the first option, the lesser of two evils." Beta lowered her head, wishing she could scream, cry, or run away from this house, but she could do nothing but lower her head. And morning finally dawned after a night in which sleep had not touched Beta's eyes. And how could she sleep? She was caught between two fires, each searing, each cruel and intensely harsh. She almost made up her mind and asked for a divorce, but this creeping feeling inside her pulled her back to this house and bound her to this husband. She was not just a wife now, but she would soon become a mother. Overwhelmed by confusion, sleeplessness, and overthinking, she laid her head on her hand and surrendered. Sleep is like fainting, and she awoke to Fouad's voice, calling her gently, saying, "Beta, Beta, why are you sleeping like this?" She opened her eyes to see him before her, smiling, his face bright, as if he didn't know the reason for her condition. She looked at him but didn't say a word. He said, eagerly, "Why are you so pale, Beta? Are you ill?" He said this and helped her sit up, then sat beside her. She turned to him, saying listlessly, "Do you really not know what I'm going through, Fouad?" He laughed gently and said, "Suppose I did know, what could I do? I opened my heart wide to you, so what is my fault if you close that door to yourself? By the way, I have guests tonight. I hope you will prepare to receive them appropriately. She said. And who are the guests, Fuad? He said. They are a group of my friends with their wives. He said this and fell silent, waiting for Beta's reaction. Beta thought. For a moment, then said. And will the gathering be mixed, with men and women? He said. Of course, of course. I can't bring back the era of the harem in my house. She said, dejectedly. And me, he said. You are free to act as you wish, my dear. I leave the matter to your good judgment. Here, Beta resolved to make some concessions to her husband, keen on harmony and understanding. She overcame her resistance and said, I will be present as well. Fuad was overjoyed and bent down to kiss her eagerly, saying, Is what you say true, Beta? How happy I am with you, my love. I will become the happiest husband. I will boast of you and your beauty to my friends and make you the sun that exposes the falseness of their lights, Beta. Here, Beta replied, saying, But what does my beauty have to do with it? I, in accordance with your wish was granted, that I come with my hijab, Fuad. Fuad stepped back, showing signs of aversion, and said, With your hijab. You're coming while veiled. No, I don't want to be a laughingstock to everyone. No, that will never happen, Beta. Set the table for us and leave the house, that would be better so I can make some excuses for you. Beta's mind went blank as she listened to these insulting words, and she stood up, saying, Then I'll leave the house now, Fuad. He said. And the guests? She said. You can invite them to the club. He said. And when will you return? She answered emotionally, saying, Perhaps I won't return. At that, Fuad threw his harshest arrow, saying, And what will become of my son who is with you? These words were enough to pull Beta back to her bitter reality. That she had thrown herself into a whirlpool not easy to escape. She swayed, repeating, Ah, how foolish and truthful I was to you, Asiya. Fuad heard her and said sarcastically, Ah, you remember Asiya, the arrogant, complicated girl, the one I only proposed to in order to humble her pride and crush her religious arrogance. And here you are, remembering her. What good did her advice and examples do you, Beta? Here you are, threatened with the ruin of your married life and the failure of your family situation as a result of that old Asiya. Beta jumped up and said, No, I will not allow you to speak ill of Asiya. If I had heeded her advice and examples, I would be at peace. But the fault is mine, and I must bear the burden of what I have done. Asiya was sitting, thinking about Beta. 2 years into her marriage, she heard so much about her, some hurtful, some she believed, and some she could hardly believe. She'd heard that after a long and bitter struggle, Beta had begun to remove her veil and go out with her husband to clubs and parties. She'd heard that she'd given birth to a son named Farid, and that she was always gloomy, rarely smiling. She'd heard this and more, sometimes believing it, sometimes disbelieving. That morning, she was thinking about her and wishing she knew something that would clarify the truth of what she was hearing when the doorbell rang. She rushed to it without thinking. My choice, and there she found herself face to face with Beta. Yes, Beta in flesh and blood, were it not for the overwhelming pallor that so clearly colored her face. She welcomed her and led her to the room, anticipating bad news from this unexpected visit. Beta sat still, as if she didn't know how to begin the conversation. Asiya said, How much I wanted to see you, Beta. The news of you reached me faint and incomplete, and I longed to hear it directly from you. At this, Beta burst into tears, saying bitterly, And what news do I have but shame and ruin, Asiya? Or am I nothing but a victim of recklessness and vanity? What do you care about my news after I've fallen to this level? I'm no longer worthy of your friendship. Asiya, I'm a miserable, hopeless person. May God have mercy on me. Asiya was moved by Beta's condition and said gently, But you are my sister nonetheless, and I must support you, whether you are right or wrong. Tell me what's on your mind, and be as honest with me as you always have been. She said, Yes, I will tell you everything. You know that I disobeyed your advice and chased after a false illusion. I tried to resist and be strong, and I struggled to draw him to me, but I failed. I did everything I could to please him with my situation, but I failed. He began to crush my spirit cruelly. He began to humiliate me relentlessly, sometimes deceiving me with his gentleness, sometimes frightening me with his severity. I thought of separating from him, but I couldn't because I had a child with him that bound me to his house. Finally, resistance exhausted me, and the struggle wore me down, so I surrendered to him, weak and submissive, and yielded to his demands, forced and defeated. He persisted in his unjust demands and exploited my weakness to drag me to the abyss, yes, to the abyss. And I walked behind him like a condemned man to the execution square. And yet, despite all this, here I am, as you see. Asiya couldn't bring herself to blame or reproach her while she was in this desperate, broken state, so she composed herself and said, "And yet, what's wrong with you now?" She said, "He divorced me a week ago after my son died, and he accused me of causing his death." She said, "You caused his death. How?" She said, "Because I fasted during the month of Ramadan." Asiya said, "And did your fasting cause your son to die of hunger, Beda?" She said, "No, it wasn't just my milk, Asiya. He suffered an illness that led to his death." Asiya felt pity for this poor woman, wounded in her dignity and faith, afflicted by the loss of her child. She felt such pity that tears streamed from her eyes. Beda continued, saying, "So you see, I have lost everything and everyone." Asiya rose to her, stroked her head, and kissed her tenderly, saying, "No, you haven't lost everything. Religion still calls you to return to it through repentance, and I still open my heart to embrace you once more. The future is vast and long before you, and perhaps this experience will build you a righteous future based on firm and solid foundations. So do not let despair find its way to you, Beda. For none despairs of the mercy of his Lord except the disbelieving people."
أو نرى الإسلام شرعا ونظاما